Welcome to the Senatobia Bible Church podcast. Our mission is to glorify God by making disciples and multiplying churches among all nations, beginning in Senatobia, Mississippi. This podcast features our weekly sermons and other content to encourage and equip you in the mission. Let's dive into today's message.
So this morning we're going to be returning to our study of 1 Peter, again, that we've been walking through as I've preached. We're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, looking at what it means to live out our faith at home. So I want to do a little bit of a rewind as we continue with this section of the letter we've been looking at on living out our faith in the circles where we live. It's important for us to recall Peter's purpose in writing the letter. His audience, first century Christians, they're suffering persecution for their faith under the iron fist of the Roman Empire. And the purpose of his letter was to remind them that they are strangers just passing through this world that is not their true home. And he's encouraging them to cling to their living hope, Jesus Christ, pointing them to the great salvation that they have in him and all the benefits that brings them. And then reminding them just who they are in him, God's own people. And because of who they are, Peter's challenging them to live lives of holiness, confident in who they are in Jesus. And out of that, then, to boldly proclaim his name as they live out their days on earth. Now, while he was writing this message to this specific group of first century believers, it applies to us living in the 21st century today. We are pilgrims in a world that is not our own, and we're called just the same to live lives of confident and bold faith, clinging to the knowledge of the great salvation that is ours and the living hope we have in Jesus. And so that then brings us to where we've been the last couple of sermons from chapter 2, as we've been exploring what it looks like to live out our faith in the real world, in the exact circles and circumstances where God has placed each of us. And there's one undeniable theme that keeps rising to the surface, this call to live a life of submission. Peter started out by addressing Christians living under the shadow of the Roman Empire, telling them that they must submit to governing officials. And he turned next to servants and slaves, calling them to submit to their masters. And all along, Peter's been making that radical claim that to live a life of faith, it requires us to maintain a submissive spirit even in the most unfair and unbearable of situations. And now as we open chapter 3, Peter brings this same exact message right through the front door, up the steps into our homes. He writes in verse 1, "Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands." Notice that word likewise. He's pointing back to what we just talked about. Just like citizens live underneath a hostile emperor, and just like servants are enslaved to harsh masters, Christian wives are called to a life of submission. Peter, as we'll see, speaks in our passage today that this includes submitting to husbands who are fair and kind, just as he did in the context of that government and those masters that don't mistreat those that are under their authority. And then we heard it from Charlie last week in his message on Ephesians, where he spoke about the roles that Christian husbands and wives are to play, and how he spoke about God's design for marriage and how marriage points to Jesus and the church. But Peter also, and this will be more the focus of our time today, he calls us to live lives of faith in public and at work, even under unfair and cruel treatment. And we'll see that likewise today on the call for women to submit to their husbands, even some who do not obey the word. Now, these might be believers who are not walking with the Lord, or these may also include unbelieving husbands. And to grasp the weight of this, we have to look at the first century Roman world. In Peter's day, if a wife of a non-believing husband chose to follow Jesus, it wasn't just a private religious choice. It was viewed as an act of outright disrespect and rebellion against her pagan husband and the household gods that he worshipped. For many of these women, choosing Christ meant living every single day under the very real threat of domestic violence or divorce or banishment. So before we go any further, let me make clear, neither this passage nor am I saying that a woman is to remain in an abusive relationship. Just as there is a line that we can't cross when it comes to submitting to the government, over obeying the Lord, abuse in the marriage relationship should never be tolerated. So now we come to the heartbeat of our text today. If we look at this passage and only see a checklist for marriage, we are missing the point. We will see Peter using marriage as a powerful illustration to hammer home his larger theme, that to live out our faith means enduring suffering with a submissive spirit. And this section isn't primarily about marital roles. It is a vivid, real-world picture of what it looks like to trust God when you are under the authority of someone, of anyone else. Peter's just using the intimacy and high stakes of the marriage relationship to illustrate a profound truth for us all. We're called to lives of submission to authority, especially when we do so enduring suffering under that authority. So the message today isn't just for those of us in the room who are married. It applies to all of us, children, those who are single, those who are widowed or divorced. The Word tells us that in order to live a life of faith in this world, we all must live with a submissive spirit. Look now at our passage today from chapter 3 of 1 Peter, verses 1 to 7. Follow along as I read. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So before Charlie's sermon last week, he sent me a text that said it was interesting how Paul wrote more to men on marriage than what Peter wrote, and he wrote more to women. His message was directed more to women. In response to that, I texted back, it's probably because Peter was actually married. And he knew more about marriage from actual experience, where Paul did not. If I can be honest, though, if the Holy Spirit hadn't given Peter the words to say, he would have just been guessing when it comes to marriage. In Charlie's words from last week, ladies, again, and I'm speaking from not just 4 years of marriage, but from close to 30 years of marriage, we men, we just don't know. Peter dedicates the first 6 verses of our passage to wives and only 1 to husbands. While that might seem out of balance, we have to understand the first century context. In Roman culture, husbands held all the power, and women were treated as second-class citizens. A woman choosing to follow Christ while her husband remained unsaved put her in a precarious and vulnerable position. And so I think, knowing the massive challenge these women faced, Peter gives instructions to them with extra guidance and care. And so we'll see 3 things in these first 6 verses that Peter provides for wives. First, he speaks to the woman's or the wife's role in marriage. He calls out a problem that they may have in fulfilling that role. And then he gives an example to encourage them to persevere. So in verse 1, echoing Paul's words from Ephesians 5 from last week, Peter writes, "Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands." Just as Peter previously called Christians to submit to the government and to masters or their employers, he now applies that same submissive spirit in the role that wives play in the marriage relationship. Our modern culture often rebels against the word submission, associating it with inequality. But that couldn't be further from the truth. As we learned last week, submission has nothing to do with worth or equality. Men and women share identical value and dignity as image bearers of God. Instead, submission is about God's ordered design. Let me give a couple of examples of that. So first, in the workplace, my employees are subordinate to me based solely on the authority given to me by our employer. But that working relationship between myself and my employees has absolutely nothing to do with their worth and value as human beings. And then secondly, think about the relationship between Jesus and the Father. Jesus perfectly submits his will to the Father, yet they are completely equal in their divine nature. In God's design, different functions never mean different worth. Peter then next reveals a powerful purpose behind this role in verses 1 and 2, when he says that so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Peter's taking the principle that we looked at a couple of months ago, is that he laid out in chapter 2, verse 12, about living honorably so that the world sees your good deeds and glorifies God. And he's now applying that directly in the home. The strategy for a Christian wife with an unbelieving husband is much the same. She isn't meant to constantly beg or badger him into believing. The wife is called to live a holy life for her husband to see. And then her godly actions, respect, and pure conduct are the tools God can use to soften an unbelieving husband's heart and draw him to repentance in Jesus. So that's the role. Now let's look at the problem that may be a hindrance to the wife in fulfilling the role in verses 3 and 4. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. First, let's clarify what this text is not saying. Peter's not condemning outward beauty. Man, I don't know about y'all, but I love seeing my wife with a new hairstyle, her face made up and dressed up for a night out. Peter's not banning jewelry or nice clothes. He's condemning a preoccupation with the outward at the expense of the inner character. The root problem, says Peter, with submission often stems from an identity crisis. Our culture tells women to find their worth in outward appearance, in status, or control. But Peter says here, a woman's true identity lies in her inner being as a daughter of the living God. Remember what Peter said back in chapter 2 and verse 13, be subject for the Lord's sake. Ladies, your identity is rooted in your faith in and submission to God alone, above anything or anyone else. Because Peter knew this would be a difficult message, he provides a historical example here in verses 5 and 6. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Think about Sarah for a minute. She trusted God despite being married to a deeply imperfect husband. Remember, Abraham's the one that actually handed Sarah over to a foreign king twice just to save his own skin. Ladies, how many of you would stick around with your old man after that, right? Yet Sarah did. She remained submitted to her husband. Why'd she do that? She did that because her hope wasn't anchored in Abraham. Her identity was not found in Abraham. Her hope was anchored in God. Her identity was found in God alone. She valued her inner identity as a daughter of God over the fears of her circumstances. And so Peter gives us this message today for Christian women, that they are Sarah's daughters when they submit to their husbands without giving way to fear. So ladies, hear this message today. If you find your worth in your husbands or your marriages or in your kids or in your jobs, your social circles, in anything other than the Lord, you will find yourselves on shaky ground. If, on the other hand, your identity is rightly established in God, you will be given the strength to face whatever life throws at you. And hey, this isn't just for wives. Peter's speaking to him, but I think we can all take some application from this. When we anchor our worth in Christ, that's what empowers us to navigate through life's toughest. Maybe it's those unfulfilled longings, or a difficult marriage, or a broken relationship. Maybe it's a painful trial, or the sudden loss of a loved one, or maybe it's just the anxiety of an uncertain future. When your inner being is focused and found in the Lord, your circumstances no longer define you. You are not identified by those circumstances, but by the Lord. He becomes the immovable anchor that gives you the strength to stand firm no matter the storm. Verse 7 now, Peter moves on to address husbands. In this single verse, he shows us three things again. We see the husband's role in marriage. We see a problem that men face in fulfilling their role. But then he takes it a step further for us men by informing us of the severe consequences of getting it wrong. Men, we are the leaders in our homes, and the weight of that is on our shoulders alone. Back when there was only network TV or cable, way before streaming was a thing, Robbie and I loved watching the sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond. I don't know why I liked that so much, because it just made Ray and the husband look like an idiot, but it made me laugh anyway. So there was this one episode where Ray is trying to explain to his brother Robert what it means to understand a wife. So listen to what Ray had to say. Understanding a wife is like trying to read a map that's written in invisible ink upside down during a blackout. You think she's upset because you forgot to buy milk. So you go back to the store and you get the milk. You bring it home feeling like a hero, and she bursts into tears because the milk reminds her that the kids are growing up too fast and you don't look at her the way you used to. You're standing there holding a gallon of 2%, completely terrified, realizing that the milk was never actually the milk. While that's just a joke from a silly TV show, Ray captured exactly how many husbands feel. Navigating marriage is tough. And as a married man himself, Peter understood this. He writes, "Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered." Peter starts this verse again with the word likewise. And so just as the wife surrenders her will in submission to the husband in his role must surrender his will in how he loves and treats his wife. As Charlie reminded us last week, love requires action. And Peter helps us out with two specific actions in this verse. First, we're to live with our wives with understanding. This means intentionally pursuing her heart with the goal of knowing her more. It means listening to her instead of trying to fix the problem all the time. It means asking probing questions and spending time doing what matters to her. So, for example, from our marriage, Robbie deeply needs focused, engaging conversation. I'm an introvert, y'all, and I'd happily sit in silence most of the day. I don't require long periods of deep conversation like Robbie does. I'm happy to just be in the room with her without saying a word. That doesn't cut it for her, though. For years, this was a real source of contention in our marriage because I just didn't get it. But once I realized meeting this need made the Walker household run smoother and a lot more peaceful and brought happiness and joy to my wife, I started prioritizing it. And at first, to be honest, it was just to keep the peace. But I began praying that God would help me truly enjoy that time with her. And He's answered that prayer. Today, most Saturday mornings, you can find us on the porch talking away, or rather, Robbie talking and me actively listening most of the time anyway. I'm not perfect, guys. I still mess up a whole lot. But get this. This is huge. This was huge for me, and I think it'll be for you as well. You don't have to be perfect. But if you can find that one thing that really makes your wife tick, and you make it your business to meet that need, I promise you it will go well with you and in your marriage. And then secondly, Peter gives us another point of action, is that we're to show them honor as the weaker vessel. I know that when ladies hear that, it doesn't feel good maybe, or you don't like how that sounds, but Peter's not talking about moral or intellectual worth or ability. He's simply talking basic biology. Husbands are called to use their strength to protect and provide, while at the same time fully recognizing their wives as intellectual and spiritual equals and their partners in marriage. So, men, what stops us from fulfilling this role? Is it not our misordered priorities? You know, it's not just that understanding our wives is a tall task. It's that we are naturally selfish and distracted easily. We prioritize our hobbies, our careers, and our comfort so many times over our wives and our marriages. We cannot understand and honor our wives rightly until we first submit our priorities to the Lord. Finally, here, Peter gives a sober warning to men. Because husbands and wives are equal heirs of the grace of life, and the grace of life being the goodness and blessings of God, to mistreat your wife, men, is a rejection of that grace, so says Peter. And the consequences of that are steep. He says that God will not listen to your prayers. So Peter's clear warning to us men is that the way we live with understanding and how we honor our wives has a direct impact on our spiritual lives. May we hear and heed that warning today. So as we close, let me make this final observation. We've heard clearly from Peter that God calls us to live out our faith in every square inch of our existence as we journey through this life. He began showing this moving from the outside in, from the public square to the workplace, and then finally in our text today, in our marriages. What I want us to grasp this morning is how critical it is to understand that if our faith isn't lived out properly at home, it won't be lived out properly anywhere else we go. It all begins as we surrender our identities, our priorities, and our preferences to the Lord. Let us live for Him today, submitting to His will as we live faithfully in every area of our lives. Bow with me.
Thanks for listening. If you were encouraged today, consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. This will help others find us so they too can be encouraged. For more information about our church or ways to get involved, visit senatobiabible.org or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Let's continue glorifying God and making disciples.